How I escaped Colorado 12 years ago. Before I begin, I have a crucial piece of advice. If you ever find yourself walking alone in the woods or any desolate place, and suddenly everything around you falls absolutely silent, stop what you're doing immediately. You only have a few seconds to act. Stop and kneel down. Press your face to the ground and cross your arms behind your head. Close your eyes and breathe slowly and deeply. Don't move, and whatever you hear, absolutely do not open your eyes. At best, you won't be noticed. The silence will pass in a few minutes. If you hear birds chirping or the wind rustling through the leaves, then you should be safe. When you feel ready, slowly lower your hands from your head, open your eyes, and make sure you are still in the same place as before it happened. If you open your eyes and find yourself suddenly in a completely different spot, then the rest of this account is for you. I sincerely hope it helps. This method isn't foolproof, but it's the best advice I can offer. And I truly wish I had known it when it happened to me. Maybe it wouldn't have made a difference, but it's better to know than not. I warn you, this is a long story, but I'll try to condense it into a few posts, hoping to reach as many people as possible. It took me a long time to mentally prepare to recount this, but now I feel compelled to, because I know I'm not the only one. 12 years ago, I was a camp counselor at a Christian youth camp in the mountains of Colorado. I was 20 years old then, and it was my 4th summer there. I loved the place and had been attending every year since I was 12. It was a standard youth summer camp with a nearby lake, arts and crafts, and hiking trips. The pay was meager, but that wasn't the issue. I did it because I truly loved the work and genuinely looked forward to it every summer. The kids and the staff who ran the activities were all wonderful, and I only have good things to say about them. I think some of them might still blame themselves for what happened, but they shouldn't. No one could have known what was out there. I was an early riser, usually waking at dawn and spending time hiking the local trails before the day's activities began. That day was no different. After filling my freshly brewed coffee pot, I set off just as the dawn light began to paint the earth in a brilliant red-orange hue. There was a trail there that everyone called Rendezvous. It was about a 3-mile loop through rugged terrain. The trees closed in on the path in a way that made it difficult to see where you had come from or where you were going. This made it quite disorienting to pinpoint your location at any given moment. As long as you stuck to the path, you would eventually be led back to the camp. But it never felt that way. Just when you were sure you were hopelessly lost and about to call the search party, you'd find yourself right back at camp. That was the mantra. Just stick to the path, and eventually, you'll rendezvous back at camp. Part of the trail ascended to a peak at one point, offering a breathtaking view of the rolling Colorado plains from a high vantage point in the Rocky Mountains. That was the main reason I loved hiking there. That day, I was walking alone on the trail, as I had done dozens, if not hundreds, of times before. Upon reaching the peak, I stopped to rest and admire the view for a while before continuing. On my way back, I suddenly noticed something that struck me as unusual. It was an early August summer morning, quickly warming up. Yet, the birds weren't chirping, and the usual sounds of rustling insects and the forest's ambient noise were completely absent. I stopped and listened for a moment. My confusion grew more pronounced. There was nothing, just absolute silence. I could almost hear my own heartbeat. A sensation I can only describe as a strange, surreal, inexplicable memory suddenly washed over me. I always find the next part difficult to describe. It began as a dizzying sensation in my eyes and a discomfort in my chest. The surrounding trees and the path seemed to shimmer, then twist and stretch. The ground looked as if it were breathing in and out. My first thought was that I was having a seizure or a stroke. Although I'd never had any serious medical issues like that before or since, it felt like everything suddenly stopped being real. I felt an intense headache, and within seconds it became excruciatingly painful, forcing me to collapse to the ground. I pressed my hands hard against my face and prayed for it to end. I felt immense pressure from all around, pressing down on every square inch of my body. It all happened so fast, and the memory is so blurred. It felt like my body was about to explode from the inside, as if I was being turned inside out, slipping through a black hole, or being folded like origami. As unsettling as it sounds, the only real pain was the throbbing in my head, which peaked between my eyes. The entire world was utterly chaotic, indescribable for a few moments. I thought I was going to die, but then it stopped. I suddenly regained my composure, finding myself on all fours in the dirt, and the world had abruptly darkened. I stumbled to my feet, almost falling back down. The sunlight from before had vanished, and there was no trace of the path I had just been on. I was in a wooded area, but it wasn't the same place. Everything was different. The environment was dim, yet I could see very clearly. I looked up at the sky and realized the sun was gone, and the sky was completely black. I thought I had only been unconscious for a few hours. But then I noticed there were no stars in the sky, nor a moon. Instead, there was something else, resembling a gigantic blue ring encircling a dark orb. The center of the black orb might have just been empty space, but in that moment, I thought it was some kind of strange eclipse. It was far too large for that, and neither the sun nor the moon had ever appeared so huge in the sky. A shimmering blue light from the ring cast a peculiar, earthy glow over the surroundings. I looked more closely at the vegetation and the trees around me. They looked unlike any trees I had ever seen before. The bark on the trunks was almost smooth and serrated, fitting together in an almost perfectly symmetrical pattern. They jutted out into small crescent shapes and lined the entire frame of the tree like segmented armor. The leaves were almost leathery, feeling more like hide than plant matter. I nearly panicked in that moment, realizing I had no idea where I was or what had happened to bring me here. My first thought was that I had died and woken up in hell, and that was what frightened me most. However, the surrounding area seemed to contradict that idea. I had always been taught that hell was hot with endless fire and smoldering sulfur spewing toxic fumes. I saw nothing of the sort, or anything beyond the strange trees. The air wasn't even particularly hot or cold, it just wasn't extreme in either direction. I was wearing brown cargo shorts, a plain black t-shirt, and hiking boots. In my pockets, I had sunglasses, a tube of lip balm, a pocket knife, a pocket Bible, a crumpled pack of gum, and a compass. At least all of that was still there. What's more, I didn't even have my phone with me. I doubted it would make much of a difference, but I should have been better prepared. I pulled out my compass and saw the needle pointing straight behind me. The last position I remembered was south of the camp, meaning, in theory, I should be able to head north and find my way back. But as I turned, I realized the compass wasn't reorienting itself. I shook it, and the needle just spun wildly. It wasn't pointing north, it wasn't pointing anywhere. I didn't know how to explain it, but I just thought it must have broken somehow. Regardless, I felt I had to do something. So I started walking. There were no animal sounds, no wind, no ambient forest noise. Just complete silence, save for the sound of my boots on the ground. The entire area was bathed in a strange blue light from the peculiar ring in the sky, making everything look somewhat like the bottom of a murky pond. It felt almost like a vivid dream as I walked through that eerie place. The trees seemed to stretch and curl higher and higher, taller and more twisted than any I had seen before. I found myself almost mesmerized, staring up at them, and I feared that something up there was looking back, waiting to strike. Suddenly, in the distance, I heard something stir. I couldn't tell where or what it was, but I could hear something moving far off. I heard it take flight, but the tall trees obscured my view. I could tell it was getting closer, and it scared me to death. The trees began to rustle ahead of me, and I quickly ducked into a small depression. I curled up tightly like a ball and prayed I wouldn't be seen. Then I heard what I can only describe as a whooshing sound, like a colossal bird suddenly flying overhead. I saw the trees rustle violently and heard branches snapping as something enormous passed overhead. I hugged myself tighter and prayed it would pass. Apparently, my prayer was answered, because whatever it was simply flew on. I heard the trees rustle and snap further away, and before long, it was silent again. I stayed hidden for a few more minutes, but eventually, something caught my eye. About 30 yards ahead, a dense, gray mist appeared and began to surge forward. It only took a second for me to realize it was heading towards me, and fast. I stood up and began to jog, trying to outrun the advancing wall of mist. I thought it might actually be smoke, but I saw no fire nor smelled anything burning. It moved quickly, and soon it was clear I wouldn't be able to outrun it. With few other options, I quickly scrambled up a tree and began to climb. The serrated bark scraped at my hands, but I barely noticed it then. I saw the mist approaching from the corner of my eye and tried to climb the tree as fast as possible. It reached me in mere moments, filling the area and obscuring everything. At that point, I felt dizzy, and my eyelids grew heavy as the mist enveloped me. Strength seemed to drain from my arms, and my legs trembled beneath me as I clung to the tree trunk. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to surrender to the beckoning sleep. I was a second from giving up when I suddenly felt something seize my bare ankle a hand, cold and rough like sandpaper. A sudden surge of adrenaline struck my heart like lightning, somehow giving me the strength to fight back. I kicked violently back and forth as adrenaline and exhaustion battled within me. Finally, I kicked free of the hand and scrambled further up the tree. I kept climbing and didn't stop until I could once again see the blue light in the sky. I looked down and saw that the mist had swallowed everything in the vicinity. I don't know what that thing was that grabbed me, and I hope I never have to. The feeling of drowsiness had vanished by then, and I climbed a little higher to ensure I was out of reach of the mist. It swirled below me like a violent gray sea. Sounds also emanated from it. Strange noises, almost whispers, sudden screams, and gurgling sounds, occurring only at random intervals and from all directions. I don't know how long I waited up there, but it must have been at least several hours. At some point, I looked down and realized the mist was finally beginning to dissipate. Once I was sure it was gone, I carefully climbed down. I still didn't know where I was, but I knew I had to keep moving. The sound of my footsteps seemed even less welcome than before. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the mist to return, but thankfully, it never did. The eerie silence had returned, and I was truly alone. Everything remained that way for hours as I wandered through an empty, silent forest. At that point, I started to think I must be in some kind of strange, incredibly vivid dream state. Perhaps I had fallen into a coma and was just dreaming up this entire bizarre world I found myself in. Or maybe I had truly died, and this place was some form of purgatory or hell. So many thoughts raced through my mind during that time. But something told me to keep going. Basic survival instinct, I suppose, because I knew eventually I'd need to find water and something to eat. I eventually found much more than that. As the trees of the dark forest finally thinned, I burst through the tree line only to see a vast open field before me, stretching down a gentle slope. The elevation must have been quite high, because I could suddenly see for miles around. That moment was when I truly grasped that I was very far from home. Of course, I had suspected it from the beginning, and partly, I still thought the whole thing was a vivid dream or some wild hallucination. Yet the sight that unfolded in that moment seemed utterly beyond my imagination. Before me was a vast field of long, albino grass and further still, what looked like a swampy area. The region around it stretched for unimaginable distances. I saw mountains perhaps 100 miles away and a colossal lake just before them. I saw things flying in the air and things moving far off in strange, unsettling motions. Luckily, they were distant, but something curious was much closer. The tower. A colossal, squared-off monolith of rock jutted out of the ground towards the black sky. It was at least several miles away and several hundred yards high. Its architecture consisted of perplexing spirals, blue hieroglyphs, and spikes, and its enigmatic black nature made it look utterly indescribably terrifying. In that moment, I was so astonished and bewildered that I actually laughed. Perhaps my mind was beginning to fracture, or maybe it was the absurd thought that I had somehow stumbled into Mordor or an Oblivion Gate from the Elder Scrolls series. The thought quickly passed, as the tower didn't really resemble any of those. To be honest, it didn't resemble anything humanly built, but that seemed impossible. Someone had to have built it. I felt drawn to it somehow, as if it was my only hope of safety. It was the only thing I saw that even vaguely resembled human civilization. So I began my journey towards it. I hadn't walked more than 20 paces into the prairie when I heard something stirring in the woods to my left. Branches snapped and trees trembled. A low-frequency thrum then pounded against my eardrums, a deep, guttural growl, almost a rumble at the lowest possible register. The sound immediately sent goosebumps across my skin, and the hairs on my neck stood on end. It was as if my body was biologically programmed to fear that sound. I wasn't about to stick around to see what made it, and I bolted towards the tall grass. Despite my initial estimate from the vantage point on the tree line, I found the grass to be as tall as corn stalks when I reached it. I looked back and heard something crashing through the trees behind me at an alarming speed. A massive bipedal shadow, thundering with each step, then burst from the tree line, snarling and clawing. The ground shook with its every step, and it was heading straight for me. I plunged into the tall grass, gasping for breath and fumbling blindly as the grass gave way around me. There was no sense of direction in there, but anywhere was better than facing whatever was chasing me. The grass blades whipped against me as I ran, cold and almost sharp to the touch. I felt scratches on my face and arms, but not for a moment did I let the pain overwhelm me. The grass gave way after a minute or two, and I stumbled out into an open, swampy area. Before me was the vast marshland I had seen earlier, and behind me the terrifying beast continued its pursuit. Its rolling growl seemed to rattle the bones in my chest, and the ground trembled with each thundering step of the giant. A giant, or something far more alien. I desperately looked around, my heart pounding in my chest like a dozen elephants as the thing drew closer. Then I saw it. A small ditch to my left with the beast closing in. I seized the opportunity and ran towards it. I dove in head first, landing awkwardly on my shoulder in a pile of mud and decaying vegetation. I heard the beast crashing through the grass stalks, and I ducked further beneath the muck to avoid its hungry gaze. I heard that ominous growl rolling back and forth, accompanied by its heavy footsteps. I saw glistening golden eyes spinning in the skull of some monstrous reptilian creature. But luckily, they weren't glancing my way. I burrowed deeper into the puddle. It smelled horrific, but it was better than the smell of the monster's stomach. I heard it stomping around for a few more minutes before it finally seemed to lose interest and wander off. This can't be real. This can't be real. This is a nightmare. It has to be. No matter how many times I screamed it in my head, no matter how hard I tried to pinch my skin with my fingers to purposely wake myself up, the vision remained. That thing, that monstrous lizard that had been chasing me, I knew what it was, but I dared not believe it. It sounds even crazier now as I type this out than it did when I thought it in that moment, but there was no mistaking it. It was a dinosaur. A T-Rex is what I thought at the time, but perhaps a different species, as the crest on its head differed from modern paleontologists' descriptions. I know it sounds insane, but I knew what I had seen. Before I could truly ponder what I had witnessed, I felt something slither past my leg in the water below. I didn't even hesitate, and in about half a second I had launched myself out of cover, almost forgetting the lizard entirely. Luckily for me, it was gone. The silence had returned once more, but it only seemed to unravel my bewildered mind. Furthermore, it felt like my heart was being squeezed tight. My limbs went numb and I felt my vision spin. I thought it was a heart attack. But looking back now, I realize it was actually a panic attack. I collapsed to the ground, crying, pleading, and praying with all my might. My heart ached so much it felt like it was about to burst from my chest. I thought I was going to die then and desperately wanted the pain to stop. It felt like I was going insane, like my mind and body had become disconnected. I refused to believe it was real and decided to take drastic measures to shock myself awake from the coma or dream state I believed I was in. I pulled out my pocket knife and opened the blade. With trembling hands, I pressed it against the inside of my forearm and slid the blade across. It stung like 1,000 wasps as my skin parted and blood welled from the wound. The pain was intense, but it was nothing compared to the horrifying realization. This wasn't a dream, this was real. Had I fallen back in time somehow? What mad thing had created such a lonely world? The more I pondered the questions, the less sense everything made. I don't know how long I lay there in that pathetic state, but eventually, my mind abandoned any rationale for the situation and refocused on the only goal that truly mattered. I had to get home. I tore a sleeve from my shirt and tried to bandage the self-inflicted wound on my arm as best as I could. My mind was still racing, and my heart pounded in my chest like the monotonous drumbeat of a marching army. It seemed I was incapable of accepting the situation I was in. Then my eyes met the only thing in sight that represented a glimmer of hope: the tower. I had to get to the tower. I pulled myself to my feet, my heart still aching in my chest. Before me was a vast marshland fouling the landscape, and I dreaded the idea of crossing it. Luckily, there appeared to be several fallen logs and mounds of earth that looked at least somewhat stable in the muck. I looked around and saw no sign of the monstrous lizard from before, so I ventured into the marsh. I gingerly stepped, hopped, and picked my way through the mounds of earth and decaying detritus. The water appeared stagnant, murky, and covered in green algae, utterly crushing any hope I had of drinking from it. At certain points, I saw large bubbles rising from the muddy bottom and bursting on the surface. My skin crawled at the thought of what might be creating them down there. Fortunately, I managed to cross the marsh without incident and without seeing anything else unusually strange. On the other side, the marsh finally gave way to another patch of forest. Above the trees, we saw the tower looming somewhere in the distance, and I knew I had no choice but to venture through another wooded area. The trees seemed smaller than the ones I had traversed earlier, but no less intimidating. Soon, The marshland behind me was again obscured by foliage. There's no real way I can describe the absolute silence that almost constantly enveloped me there. You never realize how comforting background noise is in everyday life until it's stripped away. It's almost maddening to endure, but this time it didn't last. Ahead, a sudden moan made me duck behind a tree. I glanced frantically around but saw nothing. The moan then grew a little louder, and it began to sound like someone crying, like a child weeping. It must have been basic human empathy that compelled me to try and find it, because the thought of a lonely, frightened child in that place was truly heartbreaking. I crawled forward on my belly, trying to avoid being seen by anything that might be lurking from the shadows. Luckily, I did, because as I crawled past an exposed root system, I saw something in the distance. There was a human-like figure wandering about 30 yards ahead of me. Long arms dangled from a slender frame, swaying awkwardly. It looked almost human, but the longer I stared, the more I realized its proportions were entirely wrong. It was impossibly tall and thin, more so than any person I had ever seen. I also made another, even more chilling discovery as the crying grew louder. It was coming from that thing. It was wailing in utter misery, yet it didn't seem genuine. Its body movements didn't appear to indicate it was in distress or fear. It just casually wandered, flailing its arms as if it didn't know what to do with them. It was almost as if it was unfamiliar with making those sounds, as if it were merely mimicking them or using them as a ploy to lure someone closer. Perhaps I was just paranoid, but either way, I wasn't about to risk it and find out if the thing was friendly. I just crouched there, avoiding the thing's gaze and looking into the trees. My heart then skipped a beat in my chest as I saw eyes looking back at me. Large, black, ethereal orbs in a sharp, mammalian skull glinted in the blue light from above, staring down at me. It was about 10 feet up in a tree, looking straight down at me, its body inverted on the trunk. The creature's body seemed almost feline in nature, but it truly resembled no animal I had ever seen. Its head was pointed, almost triangular, and its large eyes looked more like insect eyes than any cat I had ever seen. It had strange spikes on its back that bristled around like reeds in the wind. Its bifurcated tail swayed in the air as it hung upside down on the trunk by its curved, platinum-colored claws. We just stared at each other, motionless for what seemed like an eternity. The creature seemed almost as startled to see me as I was to it. In the meantime, the shambling thing continued to wail in the background, and I seized the opportunity to try and formulate a plan. I knew running was the worst thing I could do, as most large cats would view you as prey if you ran. And since that was the only comparable creature I could think of, I opted to stay still. I was frozen between one predator I recognized and another I didn't know. A low growl then rumbled from the tree dweller's throat, and I knew then it was thinking about breakfast. I don't even know what came over me then. Perhaps it was the constant erosion of my mental fortitude, a surge of adrenaline or frustration with the situation, or maybe it was a combination of everything that made me do what I did. I stood up as if daring the feline-like thing to strike and screamed as loud as I could, like a battle cry. It came out more as a hoarse shriek, and I could hear the terror laced within it. The creature didn't hesitate at all, but the other one did. The tall, humanoid thing suddenly shrieked from behind me, wailing like a banshee. I turned and was astonished to see it charging straight at me with terrifying speed. Its vaguely human-like face suddenly split open to reveal 4 serrated jaws, like a Venus flytrap. Just as it was a few feet away, I dove to the side, and the humanoid thing charged straight past me, slamming hard into another tree. It groaned and paused but showed no sign of physical pain despite the hard impact. In other circumstances, it might have even been funny, but in that moment it revealed a crucial piece of information. It was blind. Knowing its stunned state wouldn't last, I picked up a rock and hurled it at the tree dweller. The rock struck its back, and it roared in fury. I saw its mouth open to reveal multiple rows of small, serrated teeth. The humanoid thing then snapped its head up, alerted by the roar. In a flash, it launched itself at the tree, using its long arms and legs to quickly climb. The cat shrieked and clawed at the humanoid's jaws as it approached, but the humanoid didn't even flinch. It grabbed the cat, ripped it from the tree, and sent both of them tumbling to the ground. They hit hard, but both were back on their feet instantly. The humanoid lunged and tried to wrap itself around the cat. Its arms and legs bent at angles impossible for a human, resembling some strange snake trying to execute a chokehold. The cat thing roared and thrashed around, quickly breaking free of the hold. It then turned the tables on the humanoid, lunging for its neck with bared teeth. I was momentarily mesmerized by the conflict, but quickly snapped out of it and realized it was my chance to escape. I ran like hell, hearing the sounds of the two beasts continuing their fight as I put distance between us. A minute later, and I heard the humanoid's shriek rise loudly before silence returned. I kept moving, heading deeper into the cursed forest and putting as much distance between myself and those creatures as possible. There were some trees that looked different from the rest, twisted and deformed as if they grew from a radioactive plant or something. Some of the trunks actually arched into a sweeping curve that extended dozens of feet high before plunging back into the earth, making me wonder if they were even truly trees. After what I had witnessed with the two strange creatures before, I began to suspect I had somehow been transported to some alien planet. However, the further I went, the more bizarre things I found, seemingly challenging even that absurd thought. First, there was just a junk heap of what looked like old kitchen appliances and early 90s computer equipment just sitting in a small clearing. Not exactly what I expected to find on an alien planet. There was also a 10-foot-tall statue of a soldier holding a sword and shield. The words inscribed on it were written in an alphabet I had never seen before. By far the strangest was when I stumbled upon a large building standing derelict in the middle of the woods. It looked like an ancient bathhouse from Roman or ancient Greek times, with massive pillars carved with intricate sculptures, arched foundations with pristine spirals, and torn tapestries hanging loosely from the ceiling. After deliberating for a while, I decided to wander inside, hoping to escape the two creatures from before permanently. With any luck, I thought I might even find someone who could help me. The place appeared abandoned. There were large pools containing relatively clean-looking water that I imagined were originally designed for bathing. My dry lips and pounding headache then returned to me, reminding me of my intense thirst. It was a risky idea, but I took the chance and drank several large gulps, as it was the first partially clean water source I had encountered since being there. It tasted strange, but it worked wonders in alleviating my dehydration. As I satisfied one need, another emerged in the pit of my stomach: hunger. I knew I would eventually have to find something to eat, but I didn't even know where to begin. My only real option for food would probably be the two creatures I had seen fighting earlier, and I wasn't about to go back in that direction. There were some parts of the building that truly made no sense to me. Some trees stood inside the building itself, with the construction stopping right at the trunk. It was as if the building had been perfectly built around them to the nearest millimeter, or had somehow merged with them. The walls were covered in all sorts of scrawled graffiti. Much of it used standard alphabet characters, but nothing seemed to be written in English. The writing appeared hurried and in various handwriting styles, as if multiple people had contributed to it over time. The only phrase I recognized was one that didn't really make me feel any better. Mernavit Bass E, it was French, and thanks to 3 years of high school, I was able to decipher its meaning. Love does not live here. They were certainly right about that. There was also a second floor to the building, but there seemed to be no direct way to access it. That was strange too, because there was clearly a section where two symmetrical spiral staircases would have fit perfectly. But they simply weren't there, as if whoever built the place had either forgotten to include them or removed them later for some reason. I was growing desperate by that point and decided to make a questionable decision. "Hello!" My voice echoed through the desolate building, but nothing answered my call. All around me was just an empty structure whose builders had clearly departed long ago. How long had it been there, and how could it be there in the first place? The world seemed to be doing everything it could to defy any explanation I could conjure. It was like a fragmented collage of different places and times of reality, all awkwardly stitched together. Dinosaurs, strange cat things, tall, blind, and deadly humanoid creatures, and deadly, sleep-inducing mist-hiding God knows what within it. There seemed to be no connection between them. Perhaps they were all as lost as I was. After passing through the bathhouse, I saw the room open up into a vast chamber. On the walls were niches that appeared to house sarcophagi, like the catacombs of Paris, but far more organized and recessed. It looked like some type of mausoleum built by the hands of a truly skilled architect. Again, why would someone choose to build a bathhouse in the same building as what was essentially a graveyard was beyond me. My stomach, churned as a horrific explanation, dawned in the pit of my stomach. Perhaps the bathing pools I had drunk from earlier weren't meant for the living. There was a set of large doors opposite in the wall at the far end of the room. They were massive, at least 15 feet tall, and adorned with all sorts of runes and hieroglyphs of unknown languages. Even now, over a decade later, I have yet to find anything resembling those symbols. The doors felt like they wouldn't budge, and I wondered if I should even try to open them. Just as I was about to give up, I felt the doors crack and then begin to move. It was like pushing a dead car uphill, and I actually had to crouch to open it wide enough for me to peer inside. The crack widened, and my heart hammered in my chest as I caught a glimpse of what was within. By reflex, I recoiled and took several steps back from the doors. By then, they had opened wide enough for momentum to carry them the rest of the way. I watched the colossal double doors swing open to reveal an astonishing sight within. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single shaft of light filtering down from the ceiling, was a colossal statue carved from dark, ethereal stone. It stood at least 10 feet above the doors, and the ceiling above it stretched up in an ornate spiral formation for dozens more feet. In the center, a brilliant blue light glowed from the heavens. Staring up at the patterns was almost hypnotic, and I had to avert my eyes. The room was a sight to behold, but the statue was on a completely different level. It was humanoid in form, but with several striking differences. Most notably, 4 arms on the torso and a lack of a head. 2 of the arms extended as if beckoning me towards it. The other 2 were folded across the chest, with one index finger pointing up and the other pointing down. The statue was nude, with no male or female parts. Around its neck was a necklace carved from the same stone and bearing an emerald on a pendant that glowed with a faint blue shimmer. The base of the statue also had strange symbols carved into it, glimmering in a similar fashion to the emerald. The neck appeared slightly fractured, but after looking around, I couldn't find where the missing head was. The longer I stared up at it, the more uneasy I became. I couldn't imagine what that statue was carved to represent then, but it couldn't be a good sign. There seemed to be nothing else there beyond that point. So after looking around a bit more, I went back the way I came. At all times I was